Hey, I'm Jay Kumar, the Bass Blaster, and this is your Seafoam Top 5 of the Week in Bass Fishing. Number 1. Who's Drew Gill? Well, he's a 21-year-old MLF Bass Pro Tour rookie who won the MLF Invitational, one step down from the Bass Pro Tour, at Rayburn, Sam Rayburn Reservoir, Texas, last weekend. That made him the youngest guy ever to win an Invitational. He is a forward-facing sonar guy who several people, including at least one top tour pro, think that Drew is an absolute beast with it, especially in shallower than typical forward-facing sonar water. Now, I've never been in a boat with Drew, but after talking to him and hearing how he thinks, and even how he won at Rayburn, I can see what they're saying. Now, Drew won this one fishing for bass that were moving up into main lake pockets that were a specific type. Smaller, flatter pockets with sandy bottoms, kind of like that, like more of a U shape than a V shape, with vegetation on the side of the sand. Now, day one, he fished a typical Demiki or mope rig or jig head minnow combo. That bait looks like a Z-Man or maybe a Strike King Baby Z2, which incidentally Z-Man makes for Strike King. Days 2 and 3, he switched over to a Nico or Neko rig, which he found was better and more efficient when he figured out that for whatever reason the fish didn't want to feed up. They wanted to chase it all the way to the bottom and smash it. He said a key deal was shaking that Neko rig as it fell. Now, does this win make Drew a guy to watch? I think so, especially since he's coming out of the gate even hotter than Dakota E-Bear did. If you ever get a chance to listen to him talk, like on a podcast or whatever, take the time to do that. I've been interviewing top pros, all the top pros, since like the 1990s, and I've never heard some of the stuff that Drew said. And if he's right, it might change how we think about bass fishing. He's not just a predator, he's a predator killer, man! Number 2. Now, with that win and a couple of high finishes, here's a list of the baits being used with forward-facing sonar, because the list is getting longer. So once again, it started with jerk baits in forward-facing sonar, mostly around brush piles, but also around suspended fish or fish chasing bait. Shortly after that, we had Demiki rigs or mope rigs or jig head minnows or hover rigs, they call them now, like this, mostly for suspended fish. Then last fall, we saw forward-facing sonar used with jigs. This spring, we've seen the Demiki setup that Dustin Connell used to win. Then Drew Gill's Nico rig, which he said is his number 1 forward-facing sonar bait by far. We also saw Scott Martin win an open with forward-facing sonar, but he was using it to find submerged cattail clumps that he would then flip. So he wasn't really using it to feed fish. And Kentucky's Ramey Colson Jr., who finished 10th at the Rayburn Invitational, used forward-facing sonar to find high percentage spots on grass lines that he then fished with a jackhammer. So how many baits are being used with forward-facing sonar now?
Every single one.
Every single one, man! Number 3. We're also seeing a few sick tournament limits because of forward-facing sonar.
Sick.
As I said, Scott Martin mostly used it to find flooded over cattail patches, but either way, he did use it, and he did set the all-time Bassmaster Open weight record and the all-time Bass 3-day weight record. He weighed 90 pounds 6 ounces in that tournament, which is over 30 pounds a day for 3 straight days. That's crazy. And second place in that tournament was 20 plus pounds under Scott, man. Amazing. Another sick tournament limit happened on day 2 of that Rayburn Invitational. That day, Texas fisherman Marshall Hughes weighed an insane 38 pound 7 ounce limit.
Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball.
I think you mean that's 5 spicy meatballs. Anyhow, Marshall took the lead that day, as you can imagine, but ended up 3rd in the tournament. He said he didn't have much weight on day 2 until afternoon, and then he found a group of fish with forward-facing sonar and then watched them all bite. His two baits were one of the new Bill Lewis scope stick jerk baits for some of the higher in the water column fish. And for deeper fish, a 5/8 ounce old school Buckeye mop jig with a Yamamoto flapping hog. Once again, it ain't all about Demiki rigs. Will we see more sick limits in tournaments because of forward-facing sonar? Depends on the fishery and the conditions, and the fishing pressure, of course. But I think we'll be seeing more 30-pound plus tournament limits than ever before, man. Did someone say 4? Number 4! Here's something to let soak in your brain. Are shallower fish bigger? And can forward-facing sonar prove it? As you know, there's probably been more huge bass caught since forward-facing sonar came out than any other time in the history of bass fishing. Typically, those huge bass were only caught shallow around the spawn, but not anymore. Anyhow, careers are even being made from catching these huge bass. Personally, I think that's cool since the pursuit of giant bass kinda dried up for a while after the California double-digit scene got quiet and places like Lake Fork, Texas got less insane. A lot of times these forward-facing sonar giants were either loners or roamers found far away from any other fish or structure. It was just one here or one there and not really in tournament fishing. But when I talked to Drew Gill, it sounds like he learned about fish and fishing really just from watching fish on forward-facing sonar, meaning not videos or reading or whatever. And he said to me that he feels that on average, the average size of fish around the bank is bigger. So that's why he's better than most when it comes to fishing forward-facing sonar shallow. He's focused there because he feels the shallower fish are bigger. That might partly explain why guys like John Cox or Defoe, who don't really use forward-facing sonar at all and fish shallow, still do really well. So is beating the bank still the best bet? We'll see, man. Number 5. All right, I want to give you something to think about for this one. If you are a bass fisherman and you live in Texas, Arkansas, and maybe a few other southern states,
you are so lucky.
Because you have a state DNR, Division of Natural Resources, Fish and Game, whatever, that actually cares about bass fishing and wants to improve it. But I've come to think after decades of paying attention to this stuff nationwide that most DNRs still manage fisheries like it's the 1970s or 1980s. Maybe some of these other states do some stocking related to bass fishing, but probably not. Or they might do a study here or there or go out shocking shallow bass. But what else do they do? For bass fishing, pretty much nothing. At least compared to what could be done and what needs to be done. Now bear in mind that bass are the most popular sport fish in the United States, freshwater. That means more people fish for bass than anyone else and spend more on tackle and whatnot than anyone else. And that means through the Wallop Bro federal excise tax program, we bass fishermen contribute more to these DNR budgets than any other group of fishermen. So why no love, man? I understand that DNRs get distracted by things like endangered and aquatic nuisance species, which we pay for too, because the shipping, aquaculture, and aquarium industries haven't paid a dime for contaminating our waterways with their biological pollution. I also get that DNRs and their commissioners are directed by political animals who really seem not to care about things like people, common sense, and the US Constitution. And some DNR staffers think they work for nature and not us, which is nuts. Now there's other stuff too, and it all seems like enough of a distraction that DNRs have forgotten that what helped fisheries in the 70s and 80s ain't gonna help now, even if some DNRs are actually doing that stuff. They've forgotten that running the same studies that other states are doing or that were done already 20 years ago or whatever doesn't do much of anything. And oh yeah, the biggest thing is that all these lakes are 40 or 50 or more years older than they used to be back then in the 70s and 80s.
Well, the math checks out.
And that means that just like people, they get less healthy and less productive. And hey, just because we still go fishing doesn't mean the fisheries can't or shouldn't be better. because we're paying for it. So anyhow, here's a couple ideas. Number one, how about the states be a little less do science and more we have clients, us. Number two, how about they challenge themselves with making a difference instead of just watching lakes and fisheries get worse or coasting. Number three, how about they reorient their priorities in the direction of the most popular sport fish in the United States?
Make it so, Mr. LaForge.
And number four, how about they learn from folks outside of just agencies and universities? There's some amazing fish management and fish breeding being done privately now. Get with the times, man. Love to know what you think. I might be missing something, and I want some answers.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
That's all I got for you this week. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Seafoam. Go to BassBlaster.com or .rocks. Make sure you sign up for that juicy email if you're a diehard bass fisherman. See you next week. God bless you.